Well, good morning, everybody. So, my name is Matt Berry, General Manager. Welcome. Thank you for being a part of our program. The Member Engagement Group, this is just our second year of doing this program. And it's got a couple different purposes. One, just education of our members. You're an owner. We're going to talk about that today a little bit, sort of the governance aspect of electric co-ops. And so this program right here ties into that from an education standpoint. And then also like kind of a succession planning. Just like we do succession planning with employees, we want to do that from the board standpoint too. So we're just trying to provide a little bit broader education to groups of members, smaller groups of members at a time. Hopefully, we'll do this each year and just kind of keep doing it. So yeah, kind of like a succession planning for the board. But when I say that, I also want to kind of caution everyone, like there's no guarantee that if you're in this program that you're going to be elected to the board if you choose to run at some point. But it would just kind of help if you do. Then you've at least got a little bit of a background and maybe kind of hit the ground running a little bit. But we'll talk about the whole board role too. But we've got other ways you can get involved. Our Community Connection Fund is, and a number of you are on that or have been on that. So that's another opportunity to get involved. We'll talk about. We've got some legislative, grassroots, political action groups that you can be involved into. So that's part of it. Just trying to get the engagement part of the membership, and we'll talk about that, like how that's unique with electric co-ops, that you're not just a customer, but you actually have responsibilities, and we'll talk about that. So today's going to be a lot of history. We'll talk about some history with Midwest Electric and cooperatives in general, and the point there is to kind of tie it into today, like to make it relevant to who we are today. And then we'll talk a lot about the board role and governance, and then just some other miscellaneous stuff, but probably about an hour. So Midwest, you can see our map there. We are in portions of 7 counties, primarily Allen, Auglaize, Mercer, and Van Wert. We touch a little bit into Darke, Shelby, and Putnam. And we've got about 11,000 consumers just in the rural areas. I guess the only municipal type area would be a little bit in St. Henry. We serve not quite half of the village. Like the northern half of the village is Midwest Electric. But other than that, we're really not in any kind of villages or towns or municipalities. We're just out in the country. We serve on average about 7 consumers per mile of line. And that will come into play more in our next session. We talk about financials and how that density or lack of density, how that impacts the challenges of a rural utility provider. So today mostly the member-owned aspect is what we're going to cover. And what member-owned means for us, 2 things primarily. It's governance, and then it's the patronage equity, the financial part of member-owned. And today is mostly going to be on the governance end of things. So the history, so we're a couple years ago, 2021 was our 85th birthday. Actually, in 2 weeks from today, it'll be 87. So March 17th, 1936 is when we started. So at that time, a couple years ago, when it was our 85th, I kind of got into it. I got the history bug, and we've got somebody had told me these look like Harry Potter spell books. These are old minute books, and we've got them going back to day 1. So I thought it was really interesting. I would randomly call employee meetings or send them information to tell them what I found. I think half the time they were like, "Okay, you called us together for this," It's like, but I thought it was pretty neat. So some of it you might enjoy, some of it you might just bear with it, The reason I think it's important is it's kind of like knowing the history of your country, right? It helps you understand what your role should be as a citizen of America. Similar here, that if you know a little bit more about the history of the co-op as a member, then maybe you've got a better idea of what your role is as a member, and especially if you decide to get involved in other ways with the co-op. So first, a little bit about electric co-ops in general. So you can see some of the info up there. In the early 1900s, electricity was not available in in rural areas. And even as late as the early 1930s, only 10% of rural areas had electricity, and half of that was from, like, they had their own generators. So only 5% of rural America in the early 1930s had central station electric power. And just try to imagine that, especially, I mean, that was, agriculture community, being a farmer without any electricity. So it had to be an incredible challenge. And so the government at that time created what's called the Rural Electrification Administration, which was designed to provide low-interest loans to get the power companies to extend service out into rural areas. They're loans, they're not giveaways, but loans with interest. And but the power companies still didn't want to do it because it just wasn't profitable, even with lower interest loans. So the farmers basically got together and did it themselves and formed cooperatives, customer-owned utilities, to extend the service out into the rural areas. And that, you mentioned Pioneer. So yeah, Piqua, Pioneer is actually the site of the first electric co-op in the nation. Today there's like 900. And the first pole, I think there's a marker there still somewhere around Piqua that shows like the first rural electric pole in America or something like that. But so anyway, and then Midwest Electric. So March 17th, 1936. The way that started, that's the Bar Hotel, downtown Lima. That's actually where we started as far as the board goes. Our first office was also in downtown Lima for about 2 years. It's the site today of the Lima Allen County Chamber of Commerce is where our first office was. We were there for like 2 years. And we only had 2 employees for those first couple of years, basically just a manager and a secretary. And then everything else was like contracted out. But so what happened, so it was guys from 5 counties, Allen, Auglaize, Hardin, Van Wert, and Mercer. Hardin is not a part of Midwest Electric today. So the very first decision they made that night, and it's in the minutes, was pretty significant. They had to decide, are we going to make 5 separate one-county co-ops or one combined co-op? And they, of course, decided to make one combined co-op. So that first decision, you could see how that would have been just totally different, how that would have, the trajectory that could have taken. But so anyway, right off the bat, you can kind of see that, the idea of working together. So that little bit of culture starts to creep in already with that very first meeting with the co-ops. And then also that first night, they changed the name. So we'll talk about the Farm Bureau a little bit. So the first night, the name was Farm Bureau Electric Co-op District Number 3 Incorporated. Kind of has a really nice ring to it. I don't know why'd they get rid of that name. It sounds so good, right? But anyway, they changed it that night, and then you can see the next meeting, Western Farm Bureau Electric Co-op. And so that was our name for about a couple years. So the Farm Bureau, they provided a lot of assistance to the co-ops getting started. I think maybe all the co-ops in Ohio were assisted in some way by the Farm Bureau. And when you think about it, so it was people putting together something that they really had no idea what they were doing. They hardly even knew what electricity was, and they're going to create this electric utility. So Farm Bureau provided accounting support, engineering support, general management support, board governance type of oversight and support. So Farm Bureau was really instrumental in getting us started. But it didn't last too long because I think it just became overwhelming for the Farm Bureau. Like, they're trying to start all these co-ops all throughout Ohio, and it just was more than they could handle. So locally, the local co-ops just got frustrated with the lack of progress. We had, at one point, we had like 2,000 members signed up, but no sign of any service coming anytime soon. And part of that was just because of the delays with the Farm Bureau. So our board was getting upset, and there was a lot of, you could almost read the emotion in some of the minutes, or there were letters going back and forth. We had attorneys involved. There's transcribed meetings that I came across, and a lot of emotion was in that decision. And there's even letters back and forth between the Mercer County Farm Bureau and the co-op at that time, where the Mercer County Farm Bureau said, if you leave the Farm Bureau, you're not getting any customers in Mercer County. So it was a pretty contentious issue locally. You can imagine how the community, the fights that would have been going on. But it points to a couple of our principles: local community control and autonomy and independence. And those are some phrases you'll see. We've got them like posted throughout the building and all that. It's one of our electric co-op principles. So going through the history stuff, I ran across our first set of bylaws. So we still have that from 1936. And the language in there is so, it's almost like you could say it was from today. The language from 1936. I think it's pretty incredible. But it talks about how the member has a responsibility to be informed and involved, which is it's a unique concept. You don't have that really with any other business relationship that you have for the most part. It's just kind of like a new thing, a unique thing to have a responsibility as a customer to be informed and involved. So that's in the first set of bylaws. The co-op's duty to be transparent. And then a lot of references to community in each local community. And today, the national slogan for co-ops is built by the communities we serve. So you'll see, what I kind of hope that you see through all this is some common themes, like from 85 years ago to today, and just trying to point to like the DNA, the culture of electric cooperatives. So when I was going through this with employees, one of the things they would ask me about was like, where did we actually start, with our first set of lines? And from what I could find, I wouldn't say I've got 100% like confidence in this, but pretty confident that I think we started somewhere around East Shelby Road and what today is State Route 29. And then kind of worked our way over to Town Line Kossuth, and then up Town Line Kossuth to Glenwood Road. And then on Glenwood went east over to what was referred to in the minutes as the Catholic Church, and west over to St. Mary's River, and then up to Noble School. So that's Glenwood St. Patrick Church, which they established service on June 1, 1936. Don't know, they became a member. I don't know when they actually got service, but today they are the longest, how would you say, the longest continuous served member in the same name. So I kind of get excited about that stuff, but not everybody does. That's okay. It's okay if you're not excited by it, but I think it's neat. But
I begin to think it is. I've been with them 48 years.
Yeah. So you're the second longest, right? Right. Yeah.
Pretty good.
So this drawing here I scanned in, I believe this was drawn like around 1937. And so there again, I get wigged out. I think that's really cool. Like I have this, somebody drew this in 1937. But I can't like prove it. But the reason I think is I'll talk about the projects, but it talks about Project A in red, Project B in blue. Well, Project C, from what I found, was around 1939. So this was drawn before that, I'm guessing. And it also includes Hardin County. And when we ended Western Farm Bureau and became Midwest Electric in 1939, Hardin County left our co-op and became part of the co-op that's in the Kenton area. So if someone drew this in like 1960, why would they have included Hardin County? So that's why I think it was actually from that 1937 time frame. But anyway, so you can see our service area around 37, 38, 39 time frame. So our office, so yeah, we were first in Lima for a couple years, and then moved to St. Mary's, a couple years after 36, and bounced around a couple locations on Spring Street before coming out here in the mid-60s. But anyway, so this was our first project, and just kind of goes up near the Glenwood area over to Fort Recovery. And our first substation was on Clover 4 Road, near Clover 4 and 66A. There's some railroad tracks. It was, I think it'd be just east of near the railroad tracks. There's actually, so I actually drove by to check it out. There's like maybe a 10-foot, 20-foot square. You have to get out of your car to look and see, but it's near the railroad tracks by Clover 4 and 66A, and you can see there's like maybe what used to be a concrete pad, and there's like a railroad tie, like, kind of buried into the ground there, where the substation was. And so that was a 300 kVA substation. So just to give you some perspective, your average home is like 15 kVA. So like 20 homes today was our entire capacity. It's the only substation we had. And it served from there all the way to Fort Recovery, to Ohio City. So imagine the level of service that you had back in that day. Outages, so even as late as like the 60s, we'll randomly find like a postcard written in the 1960s or 70s, somebody telling us their power's out. That's how they used to report power outages. So, yeah, yeah. So anyway, that was, yeah, I think that's pretty amazing. But we had, so back in that day, from the records I could find, I'll talk about some of the old financials in a little bit. Our line loss was up around 27 to 30%. And line loss is the difference basically between what we get at the substation to what you pay for at your house. So that from the substation to your house, there's losses. And a lot of it's just natural. I'll say natural mechanical. In transformers and just in the distance of the wire and things like that. So the average utility line loss today, rural utility, is probably going to be in the 5 to 7% range. Ours currently is about 4.5% line losses. Theft could also be a form of loss too. But anyway, back in the day, it was like 27, 30% line loss. And you can see why, one 300 kVA substation trying to serve the whole thing. But so as if the job wasn't challenging enough to build a company, right off the bat, you're losing 30% of your money. So it's amazing that they were able to accomplish what they accomplished. So a couple years after that substation, our second substation, so that one was, from what I could tell, was shut down. And then our next one actually was just, so Town Line Kossuth runs into 33A, so just right out here. Just on the south side of 33A, right where that intersection is, there's another 10, 20-foot square little cement pad. That was our second substation. That was like 1940, so 25 years before we built here. It's I think that's kind of neat. But that was a 600 kVA, so we doubled our capacity. So we could serve 40 homes, but we had like 3,000 customers that had to survive on that. So another principle, concern for community. This is I think most people think this is a cool story, but I'm a little weird. So this guy here, his name is Howard Hopson. This is like a Hollywood corruption poster boy kind of story. So Howard Hopson, he owned a bunch of companies and holding companies. One of them was called Associated Gas and Electric, which had a bunch of utilities underneath it, and one of those was called General Utilities. So in the 1930s up to like 1940 time frame, this was General Utilities. So if we go back here, you can see our service area just kind of ends around Elida, Delphus area. Nothing up in Bath, Blue Lick, Columbus Grove. So this is our service area today, and we go to like Wilshire. So you can kind of see how most of our territory is kind of, I'll say, connected, but then there's this like island up here. So that's what this is. That was originally not us. It was originally a company called General Utilities. And this guy here, Howard Hopson, was a crook, ended up going to jail. His companies went bankrupt. There's a bunch of laws on the books today, from what I understand, Securities and Exchange Act type laws, Public Utility Holding Company Act. There were some actual like acts, securities acts, written because of this. So he was a crook. He ended up going to jail. His companies went bankrupt. So you had all these people out here who were like, can someone help us? It was a great, it's a win-win kind of thing. So our board, we bought, it. The purchase was completed in 42 for $47,370.08, and there's still like receipts. We bought 104 miles of line, serving 414 consumers. And then by making that purchase, it also enabled us to extend out in that area to, at that time, to build an additional 296 miles of line to serve additional members. So it was just kind of underscoring that commitment to community that we have, but also it made sense for the co-op. So that one I think is a pretty neat story, because we had, for the longest time, our employees, our linemen would always wonder, why do we have this like island area up there? And so it was pretty neat to dig into that. And
how do we get electric too then?
So our system is, we're a distribution co-op. So the question was, how do we get, if it's like this island, how do we get electric to them? It kind of doesn't matter that it's an island. So we take electricity from the substation to your home, and then we also are the generation part through Buckeye Power. So we generate it at the power plants. That link in between to get it from the power plant to our substation, that's the transmission, the steel towers, the big poles you see. Well, that we don't own. So that we buy, we lease from AEP, DP&L and them. So same thing here. So there's a substation in this area at the time. There was one substation in that area, and then whoever the transmission provider was at that time supplied it to the substation, and then we just take it from the substation to the end user. So it doesn't. We do try to connect them though for backup, for reliability purposes, so that if one transmission feed, which is transmission's the biggest cause of our outages. And you can imagine that if a whole substation's down, that's going to affect more people than, say a squirrel out here or something. So we do, where we can, try to backfeed as much of our delivery points as we can. So World War II, this is maybe just kind of a neat, this really doesn't have anything to do with the DNA or culture of that, but so in December 12, 1941 board minutes, there's an entry that said that we received orders from the Rural Electrification Administration to place guards at substations on a 24-hour basis, and that instructions would follow covering other emergency plans. So that was December 12, 1941, and that was it. That was the only thing I could find in subsequent board meetings, so that was the only thing. So probably what it was, December 7th was Pearl Harbor, and so they attacked Pearl Harbor, and now they're going to attack Moulton Township. So that's, so watch out, watch your 600 kVA substation there. so that's a little sidetrack, but actually though, there's more than that. So the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, our national association, was formed right around that time frame in 42, and their number one listed goal of our national association was to coordinate the program for the winning of the war. Electric power increases farm production. So it is nice to see, the corporate patriotism, and I mean, it wasn't just co-ops. I mean, the whole country was into it at that time. But so talking a little bit about the culture, DNA, member services is a big part of who we are today, and it was a big part of who we are back then. So I want to, again, just try to connect those pieces and just create that theme running through here. So from what I could find in 1937, so we were selling appliances. Our first electric rates had a reference to load control. And I wish I could find out more about that, because that, I don't know what that meant. Today, load control is probably a number of you participate. We've got a switch on your water heater or your air conditioner, and during those peak times, it helps us save money, is the purpose of load management. But there's technology involved in making that happen, and I have no idea what they would have done in 1937 for load control. So I can't tell you. I wish I knew, but something. And I think it's amazing that just right off the bat there was some kind of a load control aspect. So that's been a long part of our DNA. We had rate discounts for certain appliances. We still do some of that today with heat pumps and geothermal. Water heater tank installation, energy efficiency is a big part of what we do. We have installation rebates. We do energy audits. We had, at that time, an electrician to help people with inside wiring. So same thing as today. We don't just want to sell you electricity. We want to help you use it more efficiently, more effectively, and even back then. We also did a lot of, they called it, I think, utilization tours was the word that they used. So basically we had people going around showing people, here's what electricity can do for you. And then, so I'll just go through a few photos here, kind of wrapping up the history part. This here is actually this building, so you can kind of see, you know, right there, that's the corner right there. So we were doing some cooking demos in the mid-60s, and so that's looking out into the lobby. And I think, I think these folding doors here might be the same. Hey, you know, they work. It works for us. We don't need anything super fancy. So this was, so this is our current building. Look at the chandelier there.
Yeah.
And take a look out here and see if you notice any similarities. And, yeah. So we actually, we've done little small remodels from time to time. And the last one we did in the lobby there, we actually looked at the lights. You know, do we want to? We looked at a bunch of options and couldn't find anything we liked, and we thought, you know, that's fine. So anyway, that's this one here was our previous building. Our office just before here was the hospital annex on Spring Street. I think it's the north side of Spring Street, and so that's where that one is. But so yeah, you can see, you know, we're selling appliances and that. What I always find amazing, not just these pictures, but any old picture you look at, how people are dressed up just for like everyday stuff. If you took a picture today of like people in Menards shopping for appliances, you'd be sweatpants with, you know, juicy written on the butt or something, and yeah. But I'm guilty too, so I'm not. So I did some old photos. This was again that building, what's now the hospital annex, I think. Some old trucks. So this is probably 50s time frame. And so this, our Blue Lick substation in 1946 anyway. So I'm assuming this was actually a General Utilities substation that we bought in that purchase. And then a couple of our early linemen. From what I could find, our first lineman was hired in, I think it was August of 1938. A guy by the name of Prentice Tomlinson. I'm not 100% confident that was our first lineman, but pretty sure. He ended up leaving Midwest Electric at some point, don't know when, and then going to work for the city of St. Mary's. They have an electric department, and kind of became a superintendent, and they actually ended up naming a substation after him. There's a Tomlinson substation in St. Mary's, and I think that was our first lineman. But I think I had some financials. Oh yeah, here we go. So the first audit I could find, it was completed in 1942. First one I could find, this is probably in the 50s here, but from what I could find, the first audit was 1942. Our total assets, 1.1 million, and liability-wise, almost entirely debt, $972,000 in debt. Bit about patronage today, but mostly in the next meeting. So the earned surplus was just $44,000. So that would give an equity ratio of about 7%. Today, the electric cooperative target range is like 40 to 60% equity, so meaning member equity versus debt, like how we finance the system. And that's kind of the sweet spot. I know as maybe a homeowner or whatever, like you want to be completely debt free in that, but as far as an electric cooperative business model, you want to balance that. You want to balance the debt and the equity. If you have your equity too high, then your members, basically their rates are too high. If you have your equity too low, well, then your interest expense is going to be too high. And so we'll get into that more in the next meeting. But so anyway, the net profit in 1942 was $14,000 and 27% line loss. So yeah, that $14,000 then got added to the earned surplus over time. So I couldn't find. I kind of stopped, like I started going through this in 2021, the 85th anniversary. And I spent, I don't know, maybe 6 months going through it, and I think I just got burned out. And I got to like the early to mid 1940s. Like the co-op was up and running by then, and so I kind of gave up. So I haven't been back to it since. But one thing that I haven't found that I wanted to is when did we start paying back that patronage? And I don't know. But we did in 1942. We gave a 50% refund of the November billing to all members as a Christmas gift. So kind of along the lines of patronage, which is what we call members' economic participation. The other thing is fair rates. So we do cost of service studies, and we design our rates based on classes of residential, seasonal, commercial, small commercial, large commercial, and which is common for the utility industry. And you want to design your rates in a manner that people pay the actual cost of providing the service. And so you try to limit. It's impossible to completely eliminate it, but you want to try to limit those subsidies as much as possible. And so that was early on too. I noticed from some of the minutes that was a goal of the co-op early on. So kind of moving now to today. So just a little summary of some of that common culture through the years. Democratic member control, that's one member, one vote. I'll talk a little bit more about that now coming up with the board. The members' economic participation, that's the patronage, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in the next meeting. Autonomy and independence, the local control aspect of it, we talked about that. Education training, that's in the whole member services thing, and like what we do today, the magazine, bill inserts, social media, all that stuff. So, okay, so jump into the board. This is some of the original board members, the early founders. And these guys were committed. In these minutes, like all their meetings started at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. And they even met on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1937 at like 8:30 p.m. They're meeting to go over co-op stuff. So the commitment was incredible. And they were meeting a lot. Like they would have, quite often they would have 2 meetings per month. But you can imagine, they're trying to get this company started out of scratch. So, and even one of the minutes I went through was real touching. The humility that they showed, they put it right in their minutes. They talked about how they didn't know what they were doing. I'm paraphrasing, but they were very upfront, saying like, we don't know what we're doing. We've got all these people that are counting on us, and we're really concerned about not making any mistakes and doing the best job we can for them. But we're clueless, and so after that discussion, they decided to call in some outside experts for help. So the humility, the commitment to the members, all that was evident early on. And along those lines, then they also, it kind of ties in with cooperation among cooperatives, is they would share a lot. They would start visiting other electric co-ops to learn how you doing this, how you doing that. So that started, and that continues today big time. And ties in with the shared services with Paulding. The cooperation among cooperatives in Ohio is exceptionally strong. So today, you can see some of our directors. Adam Johnson's an attorney. He's out of Walpock. He's not elected. He doesn't vote. He's just there to make sure they don't get in trouble. So he's hired by the board. But you can see our directors here, and then the districts. I kind of got them, relevant to the map there. This year, District 1 and 2, Randy Heinel's seat is up, and Larry Vandermark's seat is up this year. And that I think the next slide we get into that whole election process, so I'll talk about that. They're 3-year terms, and so they kind of cycle their elections around, and they're all elected in what's called an at-large manner. So 1 and 2 are up for election this year, but if you're in 3 and 4, you still vote. So everyone votes regardless of where you live or which district is up for election. And so that kind of ties in with that whole Democratic member control. And voting for the board it's 1 member, 1 vote. If you're a large residential consumer, you get 1 vote. If you're a little old lady at the end of the line, you get 1 vote. And as far as background, they're just, I'll say, regular, everyday people. There's no special qualifications that's needed to run, just that commitment. They do average, we keep track of the time that they spend, and because that goes into the Form 990s and all that. But they averages out to about 4 to 5 hours per week. Now there's going to be some weeks they don't spend any time, and then some weeks they might spend 10 hours, So, but over time it averages about 4 to 5 hours per week. There's no pay, there's no benefits or insurance. There's a per diem, and I think it's like around $450, $475, something like that. But per diem per meeting, but like no health insurance or no retirement or anything like that. So yeah.
When you have an election, maybe if you can share the last few elections, what percentage of customers, if you will, participate and vote?
Yeah, well, that's good because that's what we're talking about. So we probably get about 12 to 15% voting now, which is better than it used to be, but it's still not where we think it should be. So because it's helped because we do voting now by mail and online. And that's probably about the last 10 years we've done that. So prior to that, you had to actually go to the annual meeting to vote. And so there it was probably less than 3% that were actually voting, because we get 600-700 people at the annual meeting, but maybe just 300 memberships at the annual meeting. So that's who was voting. And now it's up around 12 to 15%. And it's kind of been stuck there. When we went to mail and online voting, it jumped to 12, 15%, and it's just stayed there the whole time. So we're not sure what to do. We'd like it to be more than that. Could be anything. In some cases, there's no challenger. So people would be like, well, what's the point? And then in some cases, it could be, I don't know who this is. So I don't know who to vote for. And then in some cases it could be, I guess I'm generally happy. I don't really, none of this matters to me. So it's probably a combination of things, but yeah, we definitely wish it was higher. Because we do try to make it easy. It gets back to that Democratic member control. First of all, the process to run is very simple. All you have to do is get 15 signatures from members, co-op members in your district, And that process has started now, that you would call our office, there's a packet that you get, and then you go out, you get these 15 signatures, and you turn it back in, and then you're on the ballot, and that's it. So it's very easy to run. It is difficult to win, though. It is difficult to win. And I think that's partly because name recognition of the incumbent, and our members are generally happy, so they don't have this throw the bums out kind of thing. So it's hard to beat an incumbent, but very easy to run. And so the voting is all done by mail and online. It's by a third-party firm that does that for us. So the ballots don't come here. We don't see it. We don't get the results until the voting ends the Wednesday before the annual meeting. I'll get the results on Friday. So then on Saturday we announce it and install the directors at the annual meeting, which is on the Saturday. But we thought about some kind of incentives, like if we should do some kind of, I don't know, bill credit for voting or something like that, but it just doesn't sit well, I don't know. But
Are there term limits?
No, we don't have term limits. No, that's a good question. There's some co-ops that do, some that don't. We haven't really talked about it, so I guess it hasn't been, I would say probably the thought is because we make it easy to run, that might be an answer. Why do term limits? If it's not like running for Congress or something where you got to raise millions of dollars, and that maybe, but no, it's a good question, but we haven't. Some co-ops do that. Do you know if Pioneer does that? I'm thinking they might do it. I think yeah, they do. Yeah. Yep. Now that I think about it.
Could be an issue if you don't have enough people that are interested in being on the board.
Yeah.
That's happened. Yeah. Yeah, that's happened. We have some races that there's no competitor. Yeah. Yep. So then as far as what the board does, the board meets monthly, and currently the meetings are the fourth Thursday of each month. They last about 3 hours or so, 3 to 4 hours. And they review a lot of reports from the department managers are in the board meeting, plus they provide a written report. And so they to try to give the board as much info as possible, to give them as big a picture as possible as far as what's going on at the co-op. So they get the department reports, they get financial reports, operating performance reports. They get they make the big decisions, like on our strategic plan, our budgets, our electric rates. We'll be coming through that here this year. The board has the final say. Now, most of it, obviously, is the staff will present. Here's recommendations. Here's the issues. Here's all the info. But the final decision is up to the board. So there's that level that they do have a level of risk, legal risk, being in the role. So fiduciary, what that basically means is, from a financial standpoint, they've got a responsibility to protect the members' equity investments. It also means they have to look at issues not from a single member perspective, but they have to look at the co-op as a whole. They can consider, how does this affect this member, but they should not make decisions based on that. The decisions need to be based on the co-op as a whole. And that's tough. That's a hard thing to do, but that's kind of along the lines of fiduciary. Regulator, in Ohio, there's the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, which regulates the investor-owned utilities in terms of electric rates, and in terms of service reliability, and in terms of territorial maps. We are not rate regulated by the PUCO. We're not service regulated by the PUCO. We do abide by the territorial rules. So for the rate regulation, the service regulation, that's the board's role. And then advocate, they're an advocate for the members. So yeah, we talked about a lot of these. One of the main things is that first one there is big picture oversight. So they don't get involved in the day-to-day. We might tell them, for example, about a safety incident, but we don't tell them who it was. But so they don't, they try to stay out of the day-to-day, but that high-level oversight. And training is big. Training is really big. The electric co-ops have a really strong program nationally and in the state. And so there's different certification levels, and all of our directors are committed to that. That's a big push. It's not required in any of our like policies, but it's about the closest thing to being required, as you could say. So all of our directors have gone through all these down to the director gold level. So it is a long process when you think, asking about term limits. If you did term limits, you probably wouldn't want to make them any less than 10 years, would be a suggestion, because it takes a while to get, when you're only doing something 4 hours a week, it's going to take a while to get up to speed.
So that training doesn't have to be done before you would
Nope.
want to be a board member?
Nope, not till after you're on the board. Yep. So the industry part, so we only have 30 employees here at Midwest Electric. We're pretty small. And there's no way that we could run this business without some of these partnerships. Buckeye Power being the main one. We'll talk about that a little bit. Ohio's Electric Cooperatives. Those are kind of two in the same. Technically, they're two different organizations. On paper, they're in the same building, share a lot of the same employees, but they do two different functions. Buckeye Power is our power supply. Ohio's Electric Cooperatives does things like on the communications end, the magazine, things like that, our legislative, political lobbying, employee training, safety programs. The National Association, a lot of the same thing. They provide some communication support, safety, training support. And then the fellow distribution cooperatives, the shared services we've got with our neighboring co-ops, just the sharing of ideas. There's a lot of that going on too. And then mutual aid. If we have a major outage here, we've got dozens of cooperatives regionally that we can call upon to come in and help out. We've done that before. It's been a while, thankfully, but we've done that from time to time, or we'll go to another co-op to help them out. And then on the like the IT end of things, National Information Solutions Cooperative. So if you imagine, whether it's from a billing standpoint, accounting, engineering, mapping, outage management systems, there's a lot of IT needed that we would need a team of IT people if we were going to do it ourselves. So a number of electric co-ops, hundreds, are part of this National Electric Cooperative that gives us the technology that we couldn't do ourselves, all the way to our consumer facing, like the Smart Hub type of programs, the apps and all that. And then after hours dispatching, a company this small, it would be so uneconomical to have our own after hours dispatchers. So same thing with other cooperatives. So that's through this Cooperative Response Center. So there's tons of examples. That's just a few of them of how this business is so dependent on so many others. And that's just a map of the electric cooperative network. 900 electric co-ops, cover a lot of land mass, but not a lot of consumers. I think it's like 56% of the nation's land mass, but like 11% of the nation's consumers. And then in Ohio, so we'll have, at our very last, we only have 4 of these meetings. The next one's financial. And then after that, we do like a distribution, electric distribution 101. And then our last one, we'll bring in Buckeye Power. And last year, this group, Pat O'Loughlin, CEO of Buckeye Power, came in. So we'll try to get Pat, and he'll give like an industry overview of everything that's going on in the power supply industry these days. But Buckeye Power is the power supply cooperative for Ohio's 24 electric cooperatives. So you have, just like you have equity ownership in Midwest, 66 cents of every dollar that you send us is for power supply. And so you've also got some equity in Buckeye Power as well. But we own and operate our own power plants. You can see a list of some of them here. The Cardinal Power Plant's the main one. Probably this year we'll do tours. We do every couple of years. Has anyone ever been to Cardinal Power Plant? I'd recommend it. Just keep an eye on our magazine and stuff. It's usually around September. But that is over on the Ohio River near Steubenville. That's kind of like our main power plant. But we've also got some solar and natural gas and some other methane type of renewables in there as well. And then bigger picture, then this is something Pat will talk a lot about. But just to set the stage a little bit. This is PJM. This is the regional power grid, the 13-state regional power grid that we're all in. And for perspective, Buckeye Power, all of Buckeye Power, all the co-ops, is 1% of the PJM system load. And Midwest Electric is 3% of Buckeye Power. So anyway, PJM, their job is to balance. It's a balancing authority. So supply and demand has to always be in balance. You want to maintain frequency. And if it ever gets out of balance, bad things happen pretty quickly, and it takes a long time to fix them. So that is something that just blows my mind. It's so abstract. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around that part of the business. But that part of the business is getting kind of scary these days, you know, just telling you. Because of the elimination of more stable sources of power supply. So that's a bigger story. I didn't be happy to answer any questions about it, but that's gonna, you know, we'll talk about that later. So yeah, there's these. This is our grid, but there's grids. There's maybe a half dozen of them throughout the U.S. Just, you know, these regional power grids that facilitate. Utilities are always buying and selling power from one another, and PJM helps to facilitate all of that. So kind of in the potpourri section here, wrapping up, and, you know, Brent, if you got to leave at any time, that's okay. So we're kind of getting to the end here. Community is a big part of who we are. Talked about it early on. It was in the DNA early, where the first set of bylaws talked about being built by our communities. Each local community having a role. So some examples of that today. We've got the Community Connection Fund. A number of you know a lot about it. That's a great program. It's voluntary. Members allow us to round up their electric bill to the next highest dollar. Those pennies go into this connection fund. And so it's just pennies individually, but collectively it's about $50,000 a year that this separate board of Midwest Electric members then makes the decision of where the money is going to go. So it's entirely member driven. Money comes from members, and then the members decide where it's going to go. And that it's been over $1 million. We've got about 90% of our members that participate in that. So, and that board is separate. That one's not elected. It's more appointed. Just keep an eye on the magazine and that. Around August or so, we'll start asking for interest. And then we try to pick people somewhat geographically to keep it spread out.
Are those people Midwest customers?
Yes. Yep. Yep. And there's a couple of them here. Yep.
I'm saying
Yep.
people that you're donating money.
Oh,
yeah.
No, not necessarily. No. In fact, probably most of them aren't, just because, you know, like it could be a library, and we just don't serve in any towns. But it still services our members in one way or another. So it has to be in our general area. Yep. And a nonprofit.
If anyone here has not served on that a board, if you will, I highly recommend it. It's not a lot of time, and it's really interesting and meaningful, and you're really hands-on giving funding back to so many different unique organizations and really helping the community. So I highly recommend it. You get to work with people like Robert. So honestly, if you haven't served on that board, please consider it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's what all the Connection Fund trustees say. I used to kind of manage that board back when Bob's wife Robin was on it years ago.
First one, 1998.
Yeah, yep. And they all say the same thing, that, man, this is great, because you learn a lot about needs that you never knew. So our other big program is our revolving loan fund for economic development. This is seeded by grants that we get from USDA Rural Development. And over the years, we've gotten, I think, 3 or 4 USDA grants of about $1 million. And then it's ours. in this revolving loan fund. We re-lend it then to local small businesses at a low interest rate, right? It's prime minus 3%, but not to be less than 2%. So they've all been at 2%, might be a little over that now, but so that re-lending so it's $1 million in grants to us has become $2 million in loans that we've been able to make over the years, and mostly small businesses, and so that's been a really nice program to have. Then, scholarships and things like that. Taxes, just want to touch on that really quick. Touch about it a little bit more next time too. We pay about $2 million a year in between property taxes and the Ohio kilowatt hour tax. And hopefully sometime soon this year you'll be hearing something from us about the kilowatt hour tax. We want to make a change there. It's a little aggravating. The municipal electrics like St. Mary's, Salina, Walpock, and them, they don't pay property tax. They collect the kilowatt hour tax, but they get to keep it. And then they kind of use that against us to say they don't have to follow the territorial rules that we have to follow, so they can come into our territory, and they even try to take existing consumers. And one thing they'll say is, well, their rates are 10% lower than ours, and that's 7% of that is because of the taxes. So it's been an issue for me, but this year anyway, we're looking to make a change with the kilowatt hour tax, working with our legislators. We've got a bill that's kind of going through committee now, and hopefully will come about that would enable, we wouldn't be able to keep the kilowatt hour tax. It would still go to Columbus, but we would be able to do some kind of an application to get it back here, not for us to use. So it's not the same as what the municipals have, but we'd be able to get it back here for community purposes, like to help with maybe a business park infrastructure or something like that. So not the same level of benefit that the municipals have, but still be great. So about $800,000–900,000 a year in property tax. It wouldn't affect that, but we're about $1.2 million in kilowatt hour tax every year. If we can get that back and send it to our local communities, that would be, I think after a few years we'd run out of ideas on what to do with it. So that'd be a good problem. Member service, not going to run through all this, but just again tying in that whole history. We do the energy audits, rebates, a lot of the same stuff, similar to what we did at the outset. We're doing all that today, and the point I wanted to make was it ties into our DNA, who we are, customer owned. We're not for profit. We're here to provide a service. We want to help people use the product more efficiently. So the energy audits, the rebates, the online aspect, this is just a snapshot. You got access to your monthly, daily, and hourly electric use data through our usage apps, which has been helpful for a lot of the energy audits that we do. And then patronage, talked about members' economic participation. We'll get into this more detail in the next meeting, but with patronage, there's two main terms that you want to kind of keep in mind. There's allocation and there's retirement. Allocation is going to be taking place. You'll see it on your bill. I think it's the end of this month, the bill that you get. There's like a chart, and then like underneath that chart, I think it'll be in red. It'll say individually what your individual allocation is from the co-op's 2022 margins. And that's what we call profit. We call it margins. So just a quick little primer on how that works. So in 2022, our total top line revenue was, $33 million. And then all the expenses, our bottom line profit margin was $1.7 million. So just simple math, the $1.7 million divided into $33 million comes out, it's about 5.1% was our profit margin, if you will. So that percentage is then applied to every individual member, what your purchases were with the co-op in 2022. So say you purchased $2,000 over the year. Well, 5% times 2,000 would be $100. So you're on your bill, $100 allocation. So if you took all those bills and added up everyone's allocation, it would equal the $1.7 million. So everybody gets that same equal part of that. And then we keep that. So that's the allocation. It's allocated to you. So just like you have an electric account with Midwest Electric, you've got a patronage account with Midwest Electric. You've got two. They're tied together, but they're separate. And so that's allocated. It's on the books. It's on the system there. It's yours, but it's just kind of like 401k. It's just sitting there until you retire. It's not worth anything until some point. But we use it for financing. It's back to that equity. So we're 49, 50% equity, and then 50% debt. So we use that allocation. Everyone's allocation goes into that patronage, and it becomes financing for us to build, maintain. It goes right back into the service. But let's just say we stay on that 16-year rotation. So what you're allocated here, you'll see this month, from 2022, if we stayed on that 16-year rotation, you then would get that back in 2038. So the question we get a lot is 16 years, and you don't get, it's not compounded with interest. I mean, you get, if it's $100, you get $100, 16 years. So you know what that means. You know, you lose some of the value, but that's, if we try to add interest to it, we just have to raise rates to pay for all that. So anyway, the question we get is 16 years. Why do I got to wait 16 years to get that back? And again, we'll talk about that more. But in a nutshell, if you think about the what that money is going to, the infrastructure, you know, that's 20, 30, 40, 50-year poles, wires, transformers. A lot of co-ops try to match up that patronage retirement cycle with the life of the infrastructure. Ours is quicker than most co-ops nationally. There's a lot of data. We share a lot, compare a lot. Most co-ops are over 20 years in the retirement cycle. We're at 16. So we do try to make that as aggressive as possible. But you got to understand, I refer to it as a three-legged stool of an electric co-op. There's patronage, there's electric rates, and there's reliability. If you change any one of those legs, it will affect the other two. So if we said, okay, we won't do 16 years anymore, we're going to do 5 years. We're going to have to raise rates to pay for that, and we're going to have to stop investing in reliability. So after 80 years, you kind of reach this balance point that this is working for us. We'll tweak it where we can. You know, we'll do little tweaks here and there, but we don't want to make any. If we make a major change, understand there better be a good reason. You know, it's going to affect these other ones. So it's a balance. Almost done. So this is tying in, just kind of setting the stage for the next meeting, talking about the rural challenges. Customers per mile, the investor-owned utilities up in that upper 20s. Municipals, you know, St. Mary's in that 30 plus range. And then the co-op's about 7 consumers per mile of line. And I think you get it, what that means. So revenue per mile of line, you see the investor-owned utilities, and then the co-ops. So we're investing the same, but we're not getting as much. We actually invest more because that's why we're here. We're not here for any other reason other than to provide service. But yet the return we get on that investment is significantly less because of the density, and we're mostly residential and not a lot of commercial industrial. Service charge, we'll talk about that next month. Rate increase, so we are looking at one this year. We'll talk about more next meeting. But first one since 2010, so that's, we think, pretty good. But it's only so long we can hold that back. So, all right, well, kind of breeze through that pretty quick. Shoot for the hour. Any questions or comments? Or I think it's been a pretty good discussion, good question on the term limits. So it's just kind of a history primer to set the stage for what we're all about and tie in with the DNA. So next meeting, we'll get into the co-op financials. And then after that, we'll get into the next one would be distribution. And then the last one, which will probably be around December, we'll bring in Pat O'Laughlin to go over power industry things. So as far as general dates, in general, does a Friday morning work okay? Or, you know, any particular, because it's probably going to be in April is what we'll probably look at. So, and from a farming standpoint, I don't know if you have any issues there on what you want to stay away from or lean towards, or
Tell me what the weather's gonna be in
right.
April.
Yeah.
I'll give you a lot of money if you're right.
Yeah, yeah. So, and just, or let me know, you know, send me an email. But I'll be setting that up here pretty soon. So, yeah, give me a call, send me an email, let me know if you have any concerns. And again, it's hard, you know, I think there's 1 or 2 or 3 missing today. And last year we had the same thing. There's not a lot, but maybe 2 or 3 were missing each meeting. And so we started videotaping them last year to provide that.
The right day.
Yeah, yep. Right, well, okay. You want to tell them?
Go ahead.
So last Friday, Bob was here. He was-
To email my wife and told her. She told me.
Right.
Yeah.
Says,
It was a board meeting.
yeah,
Out in there.
right. Yeah.
What did you do last year? What dates did you said you had this?
Yeah. Last year, I don't think we did Fridays last year. I think it was just kind of random.
The only thing with the Friday is people taking long weekends.
Yeah.
You may run into problems.
Yep. Yep. That is true.
Any day's good for me.
Yep. Well, yeah. Now you're retired, so you're. Yeah. Yeah.
Generally, with a large group of people, it's, you pick a date and
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're never going to coordinate with everybody.
Yep.
It's just too hard.
Any questions on the board stuff? What the board's role? What the board does?
I assume you have to, if you're going to run for the board, it has to be in the county that you're in or area or whatever. You have different.
Yeah. Yep. You got some of the, yeah. So the qualifications to run for the board, you must be a member, a year-round member in the district that is up. And then there's a couple other really minor. There's like, you know, no felony record. You can't have a relative currently serving on the board or as an employee. Those are the main. You can't be in a competing business. Yeah, so things like that. So pretty wide open. Yeah.
You said there's no term limits, but how long do board members normally serve? What's an average?
Well, we've got some. We've got one right now, Gary Knapke. He's 40 years, been on the board. The average, ours is probably around, if you were to average them all out, it's probably around 15 years or so, I would say. We've got, and it's kind of interesting that, so the co-ops I mentioned in Ohio talk a lot. A number of the boards in Ohio, it seems like all of them except for us, have had a ton of turnover on their boards. And they're kind of just the opposite. Like we've got a lot of tenure on our board. And it seems like most of the other co-ops are almost brand new. But we've had kind of the same thing with employees too. We haven't really had any turnover, just some retirements. But we've been pretty fortunate there too. So.
Do you ever think about maybe shadowing a board member if you wanted to become one?
Well, we do allow members to attend the board meeting. I mean, there's a process like, just let us know ahead of time kind of thing. So there is that, yeah. Because that would really be the only shadow. I don't know if you'd want to hang out with them, all the time outside of that, or,
I mean,
but
if
yeah.
they wanted to run, they could see.
Yeah, you could attend a meeting. Yeah, yep, that's good. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Once you voted in, you're in.
Yeah, that's a good. I never thought about that, but that's a good point. That, yeah, you can just, you want to just ask us for, there's a form that you fill out, but it shouldn't intimidate you. It just asks, like, just so we know, like if somebody had like an issue they wanted to talk about, we'd at least be able to be prepared to answer whatever questions they have. So, but yeah, if all you want to do is just observe, yeah, just let us know. And, yep. So.
Because you know, if you just fill out a ballot and you get voted in, then you got your feet wet. There's a lot.
What do you guys, do you have trustees too?
Well, same thing. I mean, we call them directors,
Okay.
but yeah.
I think Pioneer's got trustees plus the board.
Pioneers they've got what's called, I forget what the name of it, but they have like this nominating board that nominates who's going to run. So that might be what you're talking about.
I thought they had another level below the board, like they had like county trustees or county.
Right, yeah, so I always assumed that was just like a nominating thing, but maybe they have some actual authority, I don't know.
Yeah, they do meetings.
Okay. Yep.
I know Pioneer, they had, my brother started as like a trustee for the local township or whatever, and then after that,
Yep. No, we don't have anything like that. We just have the board. What Pioneer does is unique. Like most of the co-ops don't do that. Most of the co-ops are more like ours, where it's just the board and yep.
When you talk about turnover at other boards versus Midwest Electric, what do you think is kind of the underlying idea there? Is it disinterest in the board from other areas? Is it, board members that don't want to be on the board, or is it displeasure from voting members with other co-ops with their?
I think it's more voluntary. Like they're just, and I think we're probably going to see it soon because we've got a couple of, I mentioned Gary Knapke, 40 years. We've got a couple of directors that have been on for a long time that they're probably just like, and that's probably what it was at the other co-ops that I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. I'm done. To my knowledge, there hasn't been much or any like big, member unrest at any of the co-ops that I'm aware of. But the training, so I mentioned there's a per diem for the board meeting, and then there'd be a per diem. It's a lower per diem, but like to go to, because you spend a whole day. You go to Columbus at the statewide is where most of it's at. Occasionally there might be something out of state if it's a national class, but co-op obviously would pay for the travel and all that stuff. And then there's a lower per diem for each of those days that you're at the training classes. It may be like $300 a day or something around there. But in total, I can just tell you because it's public on Form 990s, the average over the course of a year, Midwest Electric director, it's around $12,000 to $13,000 is what they'll get in all the per diems, everything combined. So.
I would ask this, but deregulation, that like utility companies got into that, but we wouldn't have deregulation.
No.
Would we?
No. So that was really big in the 90s. And the co-ops at that time, we were given the opportunity by the state legislature to decide for ourselves, do we want to participate or do we want to opt out? And we chose to opt out because we could kind of see like this isn't going to work. But also because we're member owned, and so that equity standpoint, it seemed to be shooting yourself in the foot kind of thing. Like if we were in that, you've got equity built up in Midwest and in Buckeye, and then there's this movement going on. Well, what are you doing to your equity? So So that was a concern, and that whole deregulation is about, it's really not about the distribution co-op. You know, we would still be the poles, even if we were all participating in that, we'd still be doing the same thing, poles and wires to your house, and there'd be a bill for that. What the choice, so to speak, was over was the generation part, where the electrons coming from. And the reality is they're still come from the same place. It was just who's going to bill you for them. So it would have been Buckeye that you would have been like choosing to stay with or go away from. Buckeye's rates are like right in line with, they're about 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is at or even below now. Like AES and AEP have, in this past year, have seen some major increases, and nothing so much against them, but the whole market is kind of going through this like disruption. And so we take the long-term view that we want to own our own assets. And so these other utilities that were doing all that, they're like getting out of the power supply, or they have already gotten out of the power supply business, and there's these like merchant or just third-party companies that are operating the power plants. And we've always operated with a long-term view, not the short-term. The market, there are probably some years where consumers could have saved some money, but it's more like a roller coaster. And our view is just, you know, we want to own it, we want to control it, and so it's just been this kind of slow and steady. Our rates have been stable on the distribution end. On the power supply end, Buckeye Power, they're probably about 2% a year, just kind of a gradual type increase by having that control and owning it. But that's getting to be a real interesting area these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so.
AEP just raised, a buddy of mine's $100 a month.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, good questions. So yeah, help yourself. There's plenty of snacks there. I think there's still some coffee, or grab a pop or something to go, and or hang out here a little bit, you know. And any other questions that you may have? On this first session, any suggestions? Like, is there something that you expected that we didn't get to, or that?
No, I was interested on the start of it, yeah,
Maybe we'll.
on the history.
So just keep that in mind, you know, let me know before the next meeting if there's anything you want us to cover. And so,
How did we get chosen?
that's a good question, and yeah. So
Luck of the draw?
yeah. So last year was the first group, and that group got chosen. It was just a bunch of employees. Like we wanted to try to identify who are some members that we know that maybe are more involved in their community, or was kind of the mindset that we had. So that first group came from employee input and board input, and then and this group's similar, employee and board input. But then we also asked last year's group members. I asked everyone to nominate at least one member. So specifically, I don't know if you were from who nominated you, but it would have been either a director or employee or one of last year's group members. So.
It was a board member, I wasn't told.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, you were. Yep. So yeah, Steve's your uncle. Yep. And Steve asked, so the whole governance thing, conflict of interest and all that, our board's really good about wanting to make sure they follow rules. So Steve Bauer is his uncle. He serves on our board, and Steve was like, "Is that okay if he's part of this group?" Like, yeah, this group is just informational, and you know, so.
Yeah, if I served on the real board, I'm sure I'd have to work through my work and make sure there was no conflict, because they have pretty specific rules regarding that. So,
Yep.
which I'm all aware.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for being a part of the group, and feel free to hang out and grab some stuff, or send me your thoughts, whatever, and I'll let you know as soon as we set that second date. So, thank you.
Thank you.